The morning sun hovered low over the horizon, spreading a hazy golden light across Fort Aldridge, the kind of light that softened everything it touched, except the sharp edges of military discipline. Soldiers marched briskly, boots striking the ground in rhythmic precision, while a pair of guards at the main gate stood firm beneath the fluttering flag. The air carried the faint tang of metal, diesel, and order. A dusty gray sedan rolled to a stop at the checkpoint. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, her posture upright but unassuming. She wore no uniform, only a plain navy blue jacket and black slacks, with a neat bun pinned at the back of her head. Her only accessory was a brown leather folder pressed tightly to her chest. The younger guard, a corporal barely in his 20s, adjusted his beret and glanced at her uncertainly. "Morning, ma'am," he began, polite but cautious. "Base access is restricted today. Identification, please." She offered a gentle smile. "Of course," she said, her voice calm but steady. The older guard sergeant, judging by the stripes on his sleeve, stepped forward. His eyes ran quickly over her appearance. Civilian clothes. No visible credentials. No rank insignia. His tone turned firm, even a touch dismissive. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you can't pass without proper clearance. This is a restricted area." She didn't flinch. "I understand," she said softly, opening her folder. "I have clearance." He gave a short, skeptical laugh. "Everyone thinks they have clearance. You'd be surprised how many folks try to stroll in here with family photos and job applications." The younger guard shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The woman's eyes glinted for a brief moment, half amusement, half understanding. "I assure you, Sergeant, this isn't a job application." Her tone wasn't defensive. It was patient, controlled, the kind of calm confidence that only came from years of being doubted and proving people wrong. Behind her, the sedan's engine ticked quietly in the morning heat. Around them, life on the base carried on. Trucks moved in and out. Cadets jogged past. A loudspeaker crackled with announcements. To everyone else, she was invisible, just another civilian lost at the gate. "Name?" the sergeant demanded, clipboard in hand. "Colonel Clara J. Matthews," she replied evenly. He paused mid-scribble, his pen hovering in the air. "Colonel?" he repeated, eyebrows raised. "You mean retired colonel?" "No," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Active duty." He blinked, then chuckled, as if she'd told a joke. "Right, and I'm the president." The younger guard tried to hide a grin, but Clara only smiled faintly, her patience intact. This wasn't new to her. She'd faced the same disbelief in dozens of uniforms, classrooms, and boardrooms. Every time she introduced herself as an officer, people hesitated. Some laughed. Some apologized. Others simply refused to believe. That disbelief, she had learned, was its own kind of battlefield. She watched the sergeant's hands tighten on his clipboard. Behind his skepticism was no malice, just habit. The military had conditioned him to expect a certain image when he heard the word colonel. And that image didn't look like her. "You can call Major Timmons in personnel," Clara offered quietly. "He'll confirm I'm expected." "Ma'am, we don't just call up majors because someone at the gate claims to be a colonel." His tone was growing irritated. She nodded slowly. Understood. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the guards expecting her to turn away, she waiting for them to realize their mistake. The only sound was the wind fluttering through the flag above. The younger guard finally spoke up, hesitant. "Sergeant, maybe we should," but the sergeant cut him off with a raised hand. "Protocol, Private. No exceptions." He turned back to her. "Ma'am, you'll have to leave the premises." Clara sighed softly and looked beyond the gate to the buildings standing proud under the morning sun. She could see the barracks, the distant parade ground, the hangars lined like silver blades. This wasn't just another base. This was the command she had worked her entire life to earn, the culmination of 2 decades of blood, sweat, and belief. She had imagined this moment differently. She had pictured stepping out of her car to salutes, to introductions, to that rare sense of arrival that came after years of uphill battles. Instead, she was being told to turn around. A familiar ache rose in her chest, not frustration, but memory. She thought of the nights at the academy, when male cadets had laughed as she jogged alone before dawn. She thought of the broken bones from that training accident that nearly ended her career. She thought of the letters she'd written to her family, promising she'd make it. She thought of every time someone had told her no, and how she had learned to translate it into not yet. The sergeant tapped his clipboard impatiently. "Ma'am?" She looked at him again, her eyes calm and almost kind. "Tell me something, Sergeant," she said quietly. "Do you ever wonder what a commander looks like?" He frowned. "Ma'am?" "A commander," she repeated. "Someone who gives orders. Someone you'd salute." He hesitated, confused by her question. "Well, sure. Does that image," she interrupted gently, "look anything like me?" His silence was answer enough. Clara smiled again, slow, deliberate, not out of arrogance, but quiet understanding. She opened her folder fully this time and handed him a sealed envelope. He took it reluctantly, tearing it open. As his eyes scanned the printed words, the color drained from his face. The younger guard leaned in, reading over his shoulder. "Appointment orders, Department of the Army, effective immediately. Colonel Clara J. Matthews assumes command of Fort Aldridge Military Installation." The paper trembled slightly in the sergeant's hands. When he looked up, the morning light caught her face, strong, poised, utterly composed. There was no gloating, no satisfaction, only stillness. "Colonel," he began, his voice catching. "We had no idea." "I know," she said softly. "You were doing your job. I respect that." He straightened instantly, snapping to attention. The younger guard followed, their boots clicking in perfect unison. "Permission to escort you to headquarters, ma'am." She nodded once. Permission granted. As the gate swung open, Clara walked through slowly, her steps measured, her gaze steady. Every salute she received along the way felt heavier than the last, not because of pride, but because of what it represented. She hadn't just crossed a gate. She had crossed years of prejudice, underestimation, and silent battles no one had ever seen. Inside, officers whispered as she passed, recognizing her name from the memo that had circulated hours earlier. But rumors hadn't traveled fast enough to reach the gate. That irony made her smile. When she finally reached the command building, the sergeant still looked shaken. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if I may, we really didn't mean any disrespect." Clara turned to him, her expression softening. "Sergeant, I know. And if I were in your shoes, I'd have done the same thing." He blinked, surprised. She continued, "That's what makes you a good soldier. You followed the rules. Just remember, sometimes the person you're stopping might be the one rewriting them." With that, she entered the building, the heavy door closing behind her with a low thud. Outside, the sergeant stood still for a moment, the paper in his hand fluttering in the wind. The young private beside him finally exhaled. "Man," he whispered, "we just stopped the new commander." The sergeant nodded slowly, a hint of awe in his voice. "Yeah," he said, "and she handled it better than any officer I've ever met." Upstairs, in her new office overlooking the base, Colonel Clara J. Matthews placed her folder neatly on the desk. The blinds cast long stripes of sunlight across the room. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. The gate had been just the beginning. The real test was yet to come. And somewhere deep down, she smiled, because for the first time, she was no longer the one being told she couldn't pass. She was the one opening the gates for others. The town of Willow Creek barely showed up on most maps. A quiet cluster of houses surrounded by golden wheat fields, a single gas station, and a high school football field that doubled as the town's social center every Friday night. To most people, it was a place where life moved slow, predictable, and safe. But for one young girl named Clara Matthews, safety always felt a bit too small. She lived with her parents in a modest two-bedroom home at the edge of town. Her father, Henry Matthews, owned a small auto repair shop. The smell of grease and motor oil often followed him home. Her mother, Linda, was a high school history teacher who carried stacks of graded papers wherever she went. Their lives were simple, but steady, a rhythm of work, family dinners, and early mornings. From the time Clara was little, she was different. While other girls in her class played with dolls or dreamed of big city glamour, Clara spent her evenings listening to her mother read stories of soldiers, explorers, and pioneers. She wasn't fascinated by the wars themselves, but by the courage it took for ordinary people to stand up when it mattered most. Her favorite story was about a female pilot from World War II who ferried planes across the Atlantic when women weren't even allowed in combat. Clara would listen, wide-eyed, and whisper, "I want to be like her someday." Her mother would smile and brush a hand through her hair. "Then you will, sweetheart. You just have to be brave enough to try." But Willow Creek wasn't a place that encouraged big dreams, especially not for girls who wanted to wear uniforms instead of wedding dresses. At school, Clara excelled in science and athletics. She ran faster than most of the boys, outperformed them in drills, and once fixed a broken lawnmower for her father just by reading the manual. Her confidence was quiet but steady. She wasn't trying to prove anything, she just believed she could. One afternoon in 10th grade, during a career guidance session, the teacher asked everyone to share what they wanted to be. The usual answers filled the room: nurse, mechanic, teacher, accountant. When it was Clara's turn, she stood and said clearly, "I want to join the U.S. Army." The class erupted in laughter. Even the teacher hesitated, then said gently, "That's ambitious, Clara, but maybe you should consider something more realistic." Clara sat down slowly, her face burning, but her eyes stayed fierce. That laughter didn't discourage her. It carved her determination deeper. That evening, she told her parents what had happened. Her father sighed, wiping his hands on a grease-stained towel. "The Army's a tough world, kiddo. Not many women make it that far." Her mother looked at her husband, then at Clara. "Not many try," she said softly. From that night on, Clara changed. She began waking up at dawn to run around the dirt road loop behind their house. At first, her lungs burned and her legs ached. Her father watched from the porch, shaking his head. "That girl's got fire," he muttered. She trained every morning, rain or shine. She started studying military strategy books from the library, the kind of heavy tomes most adults ignored. She practiced discipline in everything: her studies, her habits, even the way she made her bed. At 17, she applied for a scholarship to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. The application required recommendations, physical fitness tests, and a personal essay. She poured her heart into every word. In her essay, she wrote, "I don't want to join the Army because I'm brave. I want to join because I want to learn what courage truly means. And maybe one day I can teach others that it doesn't wear a specific face or belong to a specific gender." Weeks turned into months. The waiting felt endless. Every day she checked the mailbox after school, heart racing, only to find bills and flyers. The town whispered behind her back, "She'll never get in. It's just a phase." But Clara never stopped believing. Then, one cold March morning, the letter arrived. A thick white envelope stamped with the golden emblem of the United States Military Academy. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. "Dear Miss Matthews," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for admission." The rest of the words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her mother cried with pride. Her father hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. That night, the Matthews family celebrated with homemade pie and laughter that echoed through the little kitchen. For once, Willow Creek didn't feel so small. It felt like the starting point of something extraordinary. But even good news came with challenges. Some neighbors congratulated her. Others whispered that she was wasting her youth. What kind of girl runs off to the army? One woman said at the grocery store. She'll regret it. Clara overheard those words, but they didn't sting. They only reminded her why she had to leave. The day she packed her bags, her father helped load them into an old pickup truck. He stood there for a long time, staring at his daughter in her crisp new outfit, hair pulled back neatly. "You're gonna see things out there that'll change you," he said quietly. "Just don't let the world harden your heart." Clara hugged him. "I won't, Dad." Her mother kissed her cheek. "And don't forget you belong wherever you decide you do." As the truck pulled away, the horizon stretched endlessly ahead of her. She watched the wheat fields blur into gold, then vanish behind her. Willow Creek faded in the distance, but the lessons she carried from it stayed deep in her bones: humility, hard work, and the courage to dream in a place that didn't believe in dreaming. At the train station, she waited with her small duffel bag at her feet. Around her, other recruits, mostly young men, stood in clusters, loud and confident. She stood alone, her silence mistaken for fear. But inside, her heart beat with something fierce and steady. As the train roared in and the wind whipped through her hair, she whispered to herself, "This is it." Her journey had begun. Years later, when people would ask how she found the strength to lead, she'd always go back to that moment, the day she left home, not knowing if she'd make it, but believing she had to try. Because courage, she'd learned, doesn't start on a battlefield. It starts in a small town, with a girl who refuses to let the world decide how big her dreams can be. The first thing Clara noticed when she arrived at the U.S. Military Academy wasn't the grand entrance, the towering flag, or the statue of past generals. It was the silence before the storm. Rows of cadets stood at attention as upperclassmen barked orders that shook the morning air. Boots clapped in rhythm, commands echoed off stone buildings, and the sun glared unforgivingly off polished brass buttons. Clara took a deep breath and stepped through the gates of West Point, where dreams were tested and excuses died fast. Within minutes, she was swallowed by chaos. "Move it, candidate. Eyes up, chin in," shouted a senior cadet as he circled her like a hawk. "Yes, sir," Clara answered, trying to match the roar of the others. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she refused to show weakness. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and determination. She could already tell this was a place where only the toughest survived, and mercy was not part of the curriculum. By the end of her first day, her muscles trembled, her throat burned, and she could barely lift her arms. Yet, when the lights went out that night in the dormitory, she lay awake on her bunk staring at the ceiling, a quiet smile on her face. She was here. She had made it. But West Point had its way of breaking confidence and rebuilding it from rubble. In her first month, she learned that physical exhaustion was easier to conquer than prejudice. There were only a handful of women in her class. Some instructors treated them fairly, but others made it clear they didn't belong. During morning drills, when she lifted sandbags or ran obstacle courses, she heard whispers behind her. "She's slowing us down. Bet she won't last a semester. Just wait till it rains. She'll quit." But Clara didn't quit. Rain or shine, she was the first one out of bed and the last to leave the field. She ran farther, climbed higher, and carried heavier packs than anyone expected. When her arms shook, she clenched her teeth and pushed harder. When her uniform was soaked in sweat, she reminded herself why she was there, not to prove them wrong, but to prove herself right. One afternoon, during weapons training, a fellow cadet named Blake Harrison mocked her openly. "Careful with that rifle, Matthews," he said. "Wouldn't want you to chip a nail." A few of the others laughed. Clara turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. Her voice was calm. "If I chip a nail, Harrison, it'll be while dragging you out of a firefight." The laughter stopped. From that day, Blake left her alone. She wasn't confrontational by nature, but she'd learned that silence could be mistaken for weakness. And sometimes words had to strike like bullets, quick, sharp, and unforgettable. As the months passed, her discipline began to draw notice. One of her instructors, Major Douglas, a stern man with a face carved from granite, saw something different in her. "You don't complain," he said after a grueling exercise. "Most do." "Complaining doesn't change the outcome, sir," she replied, catching her breath. He nodded slowly. "Good answer. Keep that mindset. The academy breaks a lot of good people. Don't let it break you." His words stuck with her. But even Major Douglas couldn't shield her from the academy's harshest challenge, the winter field survival test. It was the ultimate endurance trial. A week in the mountains. Sub-zero temperatures, limited food, and full gear. Candidates would be divided into teams, given minimal supplies, and expected to navigate, survive, and lead under pressure. When teams were announced, Clara was placed in Squad Delta, 6 cadets, all male, all skeptical of her. The first night in the freezing woods, as snowflakes drifted around their campfire, one of the cadets muttered, "If she slows us down, we fail." Clara didn't respond. She focused on tying her pack tighter and checking the compass bearings. The next morning, while the others groaned awake, she had already scouted the route, boiled snow for water, and logged their position. By the third day, the squad was exhausted. Blisters bled. Tempers rose. The map was nearly useless in the whiteout conditions. The leader, Harrison, yes, the same one who had mocked her, began panicking. "Nothing looks right," he shouted. "We're lost." Clara stepped forward quietly. "We're not lost," she said. "You're holding the map upside down." Harrison glared. "You think you can do better?" "Yes," she said simply, taking the map. For a tense moment, he hesitated. Then, without another word, he handed it to her. Clara studied it quickly, aligned it with the compass, and pointed ahead. "We move east until the ridge line dips. There's a frozen stream we can follow south." Her voice was calm, but firm, the kind of tone people obey without thinking. By nightfall, they found the checkpoint. No one spoke, but as they built their tents, a quiet respect settled among them. They followed her lead for the rest of the mission. When they returned to base a week later, dirty, frostbitten, and victorious, the evaluators announced that Squad Delta had scored the highest survival marks in their class. The instructor's report read, "Exceptional situational awareness. Leadership under pressure, remarkable." For the first time, Clara's name was mentioned in briefings not as a curiosity, but as a model of command potential. Yet even in triumph, she stayed humble. When her squad congratulated her, she simply said, "We all made it out because no one quit." Remember that. That night, as she sat alone in her bunk, polishing her boots, she thought about how far she'd come from Willow Creek, the same girl who'd once been laughed at, for her dream was now leading the very people who had doubted her. Still, she didn't allow herself to grow comfortable. She had seen too many peers rise fast, only to fall faster. Every day at the academy was a reminder that the true enemy wasn't failure, it was complacency. During her final year, she earned the role of cadet captain, one of the highest honors a student could hold. The responsibility was immense, managing drills, overseeing lower cadets, maintaining discipline. On graduation day, when she stood in line among hundreds of uniforms, medals gleaming, her parents watched from the crowd, tears in their eyes. The superintendent stepped to the podium and said, "Excellence is not defined by strength of body, but by strength of will." And few have demonstrated that will more clearly than Cadet Clara J. Matthews. Applause thundered through the courtyard. Clara stood still, her posture perfect, her heart steady. She didn't smile until she found her parents in the stands, her father saluting her, her mother wiping her eyes. In that moment, she realized something profound. The academy hadn't just trained her to be a soldier. It had taught her to endure when the world doubted her, to rise not in defiance, but in purpose. Years later, when recruits under her command would struggle, she would remember the girl who stood alone at West Point, shivering in the cold, holding a map no one trusted her to read, and leading them home anyway. That was the foundation of her leadership. Not the medals, not the rank, but the quiet courage to keep walking forward when every voice around her said she couldn't. The desert wind howled across the training grounds like an angry spirit. It carried sand that bit into every exposed patch of skin, and the sun above showed no mercy. The sky was a pale, merciless blue, the kind that could make even the toughest soldiers feel small. Captain Clara Matthews squinted through the glare, one hand shielding her eyes, the other holding her rifle tight against her vest. She had come a long way from West Point, now leading a platoon of soldiers through the Army's most brutal leadership test, the Desert Endurance Exercise. It wasn't just another drill. It was a proving ground for those destined for command. 3 weeks of heat, isolation, and relentless movement through miles of unforgiving terrain. No comfort. No shortcuts. Only grit. Her team of 12 soldiers followed her through the dunes, exhausted but loyal. They trusted her completely. She had earned that trust in sweat, in silence, and in the unspoken language of survival. But even heroes have limits. On the 4th day, disaster struck. They were scaling a ridge, a jagged wall of stone and shifting sand. The climb was steep, the air heavy with heat. Clara was in the lead, anchoring the rope line, her muscles straining against the pull of gravity. Suddenly, her footing slipped. The sand gave way under her boots. For a split second, she was weightless, and then the world spun violently. She tumbled down the slope, hitting rock, sand, and air in a blur until her body slammed hard against the desert floor. "Captain down!" Someone shouted. Her breath left her lungs like a gust of wind. Pain shot through her leg, sharp, white-hot pain that screamed louder than any sound she could make. She tried to move, but her right leg refused to cooperate. A jagged rock had gashed deep into her thigh, and she could already feel the warm trickle of blood soaking through her fatigues. "Stay still, ma'am," yelled Sergeant Cole, sliding down to her side. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing her jaw tight. "We keep moving." Cole shook his head. "With respect, Captain, you're not fine." The medic arrived within minutes, assessing the wound. Deep laceration. Could hit the bone. She needs evac. Evacuation. The one word Clara didn't want to hear. She clenched her fists. "We don't quit because of scratches." "Ma'am, this isn't a scratch," the medic insisted. "If infection sets in out here, it's over." Clara looked up at the endless horizon, miles of sand still left to cross, and her pride weighing heavier than her gear. The last thing she wanted was to be carried out of the field like some casualty. She had worked too hard to be seen as fragile. But deep inside, a darker thought crept in. What if this was it? What if all her years of struggle, of proving herself again and again, ended here in a desert pit before she ever reached command? By sunset, the pain had grown unbearable. She was forced onto a stretcher, her vision blurring with every jolt of the vehicle as it sped toward the field hospital. That night, she drifted in and out of consciousness under the dim light of a medical tent. The doctor's voice echoed faintly through the haze. Compound fracture. Severe muscle tear. She needs surgery. Recovery. Months, maybe more. Months. The words stabbed deeper than any injury. When she woke fully, her leg was wrapped in layers of bandage, immobilized in a brace. Her uniform had been replaced by a hospital gown. The ceiling fan hummed lazily above her, the cruel rhythm of forced stillness. Her platoon came to visit. They stood at her bedside, trying to hide their concern. "You did good out there, ma'am," said Cole softly. "You kept us going." She forced a small smile. "That's the job, Sergeant." But the moment they left, the smile vanished. For weeks, she lay trapped in the hospital, staring at the ceiling, feeling useless. The leg that had carried her through the academy, through storms and snow and drills, now lay still as stone. Doctors told her she might walk again, but running, climbing, commanding? That was uncertain. Uncertain wasn't good enough. There were nights when frustration clawed at her chest until she wanted to scream. She watched the sun set through the window, thinking of her soldiers still training, while she sat idle, benched by fate. One night, the nurse found her on the floor, struggling to stand. "Captain, you can't do that yet." "I have to," Clara gasped, sweat beading on her forehead. "If I can stand, I can walk. If I can walk, I can fight." The nurse sighed, but didn't stop her. Maybe she knew. You can't talk a soldier out of their own war. Day by day, Clara pushed herself. First standing, then balancing, then taking one shaky step, then another. The pain was merciless, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was still alive. Her physical therapist, Lieutenant Morgan, tried to slow her down. "You're overdoing it," he warned. "You need to heal, not destroy what's left." Clara looked at him, her voice steady. "If I stop moving, I'll never move again." He sighed. "You're the most stubborn patient I've ever seen." "I'll take that as a compliment." Months passed. The limp remained, but the fire in her eyes never dimmed. She trained in secret, long after therapy sessions ended, walking the halls at night with crutches, dragging weights, forcing her body to remember what it once could do. By the 6th month, she was walking unaided. By the 8th, she was running again, slow, uneven, but running. When she finally reported back to the training field, the younger officers stared in disbelief. "Captain Matthews?" One of them said. "They said you wouldn't be back." Clara tightened her bootlaces, her jaw set. Then they were wrong. The desert had broken her body, but it hadn't broken her will. Her return was nothing short of legendary. Word spread through the ranks, the captain who came back from a shattered leg. She became a symbol of resilience, not just to women in uniform, but to every soldier who had ever felt close to giving up. Even Major Douglas, her old instructor, sent her a letter that simply read, "Strength isn't measured by how hard you fight, but how many times you stand after falling. You've stood again, Clara. That's what makes a leader." She pinned the letter to her locker as a reminder. When she was finally cleared for full active duty, she walked through the same gates she'd entered years ago as a trembling cadet. Only this time, her limp was almost invisible, a quiet scar of the war she had fought with herself. That day, she didn't just reclaim her post. She reclaimed her purpose. And though the soldiers saluted her with pride, none of them knew what it had cost her to stand before them again. But she knew. And that was enough. Because sometimes, the strongest battles are the ones nobody sees. The briefing room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desert dust. Maps were spread across the table, red pins marking enemy activity zones, and the tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Captain Clara Matthews stood at the head of her platoon, her uniform crisp, her posture sharp, her mind already calculating a dozen possibilities. The year was 2003, and the United States had just begun. Large-scale operations in the Middle East, Clara's unit, the 112th Infantry Battalion, had been deployed to a region that intelligence called unstable, but the troops had already learned that unstable was military code for chaos waiting to explode. Her mission sounded simple on paper: secure a small village suspected of harboring enemy insurgents, protect local civilians, and establish a safe perimeter for humanitarian aid teams. But Clara knew better. In war, simple didn't exist. That morning, as she stood in the sand outside the base, the sun still low and orange on the horizon, she looked at her men and women loading their gear into the Humvees. They were young, most of them barely out of college. Some wore nervous smiles. Others hid their fear behind jokes and bravado. "Listen up," she shouted. Every soldier turned. This mission isn't about chasing shadows. It's about keeping people alive, ours and theirs. We move clean, we move smart, and we come back together. Clear? "Ma'am, yes, ma'am," the group shouted back. "Then mount up." As the engines roared to life, Clara climbed into the lead vehicle beside Sergeant Cole, her trusted second in command, the same man who had been with her during the desert accident. He gave her a quick nod. "Feels like déjà vu, ma'am," he said. "Let's hope it doesn't end the same way," she replied with a faint smile. The convoy rolled out across the barren plains, sand whipping against the windshield like shards of glass. The air shimmered with heat, and in the distance, the mountains stood like jagged ghosts. Hours later, they reached the outskirts of the village, a cluster of sun-baked houses surrounded by date palms and dusty roads. Children watched from doorways, their eyes wide and uncertain. The soldiers moved carefully, weapons lowered but ready. "Looks quiet," said Private Reynolds. "Too quiet," Clara muttered, scanning the rooftops. Something in the air felt wrong. The silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that comes before thunder. Then, without warning, a deafening explosion tore through the street. "Ambush!" Cole screamed. The ground shook as a Humvee went up in flames. Bullets rained from rooftops. Dust and screams filled the air. "Take cover. Return fire," Clara commanded, dropping behind a wall as debris flew past her face. Her training kicked in like instinct. She signaled flanking positions, directed her squad to cover wounded soldiers, and relayed coordinates back to base. Every order was sharp, deliberate, the voice of someone who had learned to think faster than fear. Cole dragged a bleeding soldier behind cover. "We're pinned, Captain." "They've got us boxed from 3 sides." Clara's eyes darted to the map in her wrist pouch. The narrow alley to the east. It could lead them behind enemy fire, but it was risky. She made her decision. "Cole, you take Alpha Team through the alley. I'll hold here with Bravo." Cole hesitated. "That's suicide, ma'am." "Then make sure it's worth it," she snapped. He understood. They'd been through too much together to argue now. As Cole's team vanished into the smoke, Clara rallied her remaining soldiers. "Suppressive fire now." The street erupted in gunfire. Clara moved from cover to cover, shouting commands, pulling wounded men to safety, firing bursts downrange. Her leg, the same one she'd broken in the desert, throbbed with pain, but she didn't let it slow her. Then she heard the sound, the terrifying click of an empty magazine. She dropped behind a crumbling wall, reloading as bullets chipped the stone above her head. Her hands shook for half a second, but then she forced them still. Focus. Control. Move. Suddenly, a shadow loomed from behind the wall. An enemy fighter, rifle raised. Clara reacted without thinking. She turned, grabbed his wrist, and drove her elbow into his chest, knocking him backward. The rifle clattered to the ground. She kicked it away and shouted for backup, her adrenaline burning hot. Moments later, the sound of U.S. reinforcements echoed in the distance. Cole's team had succeeded. They'd flanked the enemy and forced a retreat. Within minutes, the gunfire faded. The air filled with smoke and the distant cries of the wounded. Clara exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the aftermath of survival. Status. She called. 2 wounded, no Kia, Cole reported. We've secured the perimeter. Enemy fled northeast. Clara nodded, wiping the sweat and dirt from her face. Her uniform was torn, her voice hoarse, but her people were alive. That was what mattered. When the medics arrived, they found her kneeling beside one of the injured soldiers, wrapping a makeshift tourniquet from her own sleeve. "Captain, you're bleeding," one of them said, noticing a cut on her arm. She looked down at it, shrugged. Add it to the collection. By nightfall, the village was calm again. The locals, who had hidden during the firefight, began to emerge, cautious, silent, their faces etched with both gratitude and grief. Clara approached one elderly man who clasped her hands and said something in broken English. "You protect our home. Thank you." She smiled faintly. "Just doing my job." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. That night, as she sat on a rooftop overlooking the quiet village, the stars above the desert were endless. Cole joined her, holding 2 metal cups of strong, bitter coffee. "Hell of a first battle, ma'am," he said quietly. "Yeah," she murmured. "Hell of a reminder that textbooks don't teach everything." He chuckled softly. "You were incredible out there." Clara took a sip, her gaze distant. "No, Cole, we were incredible. Every one of them held the line. That's leadership. Not one person doing everything right, but everyone refusing to do the wrong thing." He nodded. "Still, command's gonna hear about this. You saved a lot of lives today." She looked out over the horizon, the faint glow of another distant town flickering in the dark. "They'll hear about it," she said softly. "But I hope they don't forget about the ones we lost." For the first time in her career, Clara felt the true weight of command, the invisible burden no medal could honor and no speech could ease. The choices that meant others lived or died. The faces she would never forget. When dawn broke, she stood and watched the sunlight crawl across the sand. Her legs still ached. Her heart was heavy. But her purpose had never been clearer. That mission would go on to define her reputation in the Army, the operation where Captain Clara Matthews led under fire, saved her platoon, and turned a disaster into victory. Yet in her own mind, it wasn't about glory. It was about survival, and the silent promise she made that day. No one under my command will ever be left behind. It was a promise she would carry with her, to the next war, the next command, and ultimately, to the day she'd face the guards who told her, "Ma'am, you can't pass." The morning after the ambush, the desert sky was quiet again, too quiet. The kind of stillness that always follows chaos, when the mind hasn't caught up with what the body survived. Captain Clara Matthews walked the perimeter of the burned-out village, boots crunching on broken stone. Smoke still curled from the wreckage of one of the destroyed Humvees, and the air smelled of oil, dust, and something metallic she refused to name. Her platoon was alive. That was victory enough. But she didn't feel victorious. Every command she'd given still echoed in her head, every gunshot, every scream. She'd made the right choices, but the weight of them hung on her like armor she couldn't remove. By midday, a helicopter landed on the outskirts of the village, whipping up sand like a storm. From it stepped Colonel Anthony Rourke, a tall, seasoned officer known across divisions for his icy precision. His arrival meant only one thing. Command had taken notice. "Captain Matthews," Rourke said, removing his sunglasses. His voice was deep, steady, the kind that could silence a room. "Walk with me." Clara fell in step beside him, her back straight, her uniform still stained with yesterday's dust. "I've read your after-action report," he began. "Frankly, it reads like fiction. Outnumbered 3-1, pinned from 3 directions, and still managed to neutralize hostiles and evacuate civilians with no casualties?" Clara hesitated. "We did what we had to, sir." Rourke stopped walking and turned to face her. "You didn't just do what you had to. You demonstrated leadership under fire that most officers twice your age can't manage." She didn't know how to respond, so she stayed silent. He continued, "Command wants to recognize that. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to Forward Base Camp Garrison. You'll take over as acting executive officer." Clara blinked. "Sir, I'm qualified," he interrupted. "Don't argue with good luck, Captain." She wanted to feel proud, but a strange unease crept through her. She wasn't sure she was ready for command, not like this. But in the military, hesitation wasn't an option. Orders were orders. Within days, Clara found herself at Camp Garrison, a sprawling outpost deep in hostile territory. It was a fortress of steel and sandbags, surrounded by endless desert, its walls humming with the rhythm of helicopters, generators, and soldiers shouting orders. The base was under the command of Colonel Patrick Lawson, a respected but rigid leader who had served since before Clara was born. His handshake was firm, but his eyes held a trace of doubt. "Captain Matthews," he said, glancing at her personnel file. "Your record's impressive. A bit too impressive for someone your age." Clara kept her tone even. "I'll do my best not to disappoint, sir." Lawson's lips curved slightly. "I expect nothing less. You'll be managing logistics and operations for now. Troop rotations, supply lines, coordination with civilian agencies. I'll watch how you handle it." And just like that, she was thrown into the heart of leadership. The first few weeks were a blur of reports, schedules, and constant crisis. Supply trucks delayed, communication lines cut, local protests flaring outside the gates. Clara slept no more than 4 hours a night, her desk buried in paperwork, her radio buzzing every few minutes. But she thrived on it. Her discipline from West Point, her calm under pressure, her refusal to break, it all came back like muscle memory. Soldiers began to notice. When she walked through the base, they saluted her not out of obligation, but respect. Still, not everyone approved. At the officers' mess, she overheard whispers. Lawson's new pet project, war hero or PR stunt. Let's see how long she lasts before the cracks show. Clara ignored them. She'd faced worse. One night, while reviewing supply manifests in her dimly lit office, Colonel Lawson entered without knocking. "You're working late again," he said. "Still catching up, sir," she replied without looking up. He studied her quietly for a moment. "You remind me of myself once. Too stubborn to rest. Too proud to admit you're tired. I can rest when the work's done." He smiled faintly. "The work's never done, Captain. You'll learn that soon enough." Over the following months, Clara's leadership began to transform the base. Morale improved. Operations ran smoother. She reorganized the patrol schedules to reduce fatigue, established a mentorship program for younger officers, and insisted that every soldier, no matter their rank, deserved to be heard. It wasn't just efficient. It was human. And for that, the soldiers loved her. But her success wasn't without its challenges. Midway through her assignment, a convoy bringing medical supplies from the coast went missing. Communications were lost halfway through the route. The supplies were critical, not just for their troops, but for nearby villages relying on them. Colonel Lawson was away at a regional summit. The acting commander on base was Clara. She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she assembled a rescue convoy. We move out in 15. We find them before sundown. Sergeant Cole, now stationed at her base, raised an eyebrow. You sure about this, ma'am? The route's crawling with hostiles. Clara looked him straight in the eye. Then we move faster. The mission stretched long into the night. They found the missing convoy ambushed and stranded in a ravine. Enemy gunfire echoed from the hills. Clara directed her troops with precise, measured commands, coordinating medevac under fire and clearing a safe extraction path. By dawn, every soldier and every crate of supplies was accounted for. When they returned to camp, covered in soot and sweat, the base erupted in cheers. Word spread quickly. Matthews led the rescue herself. Didn't leave anyone behind. She's the real deal. A week later, Colonel Lawson called her into his office. You disobeyed standard protocol, he said quietly. Yes, sir, she admitted. He leaned back in his chair. And you saved 20 lives doing it. A slow smile crept across his face. Congratulations, Major Matthews. She blinked. Sir, you've been promoted. The paperwork came through this morning. And between us, you've earned it. For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. The title Major felt heavy, powerful, undeserved, and yet perfectly right. As she saluted, Lawson added, Someday, you'll run a command of your own. Maybe sooner than you think. Those words would come true faster than either of them imagined. Months later, Colonel Lawson retired unexpectedly. Command sent word that a new commanding officer would be appointed, someone who had proven both strategic excellence and field courage. The orders came sealed. Clara read them twice before she believed them. Major Clara J. Matthews is hereby promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and assigned as base commander, Camp Garrison. Her hands trembled as she set the letter down. She had dreamed of command her entire life, but now that it was here, the reality of it sank deep. The lives, the decisions, the weight of every choice. It was all hers. When she walked out of her office that evening, the soldiers stood taller, saluting her with pride. Cole grinned. Guess we're taking orders from the boss now. Clara smiled faintly. No, we're taking orders from someone who never forgot where she came from. That night, she stood alone on the base's command tower, watching the wind swirl the desert sand below. She thought of her younger self, the girl who'd once stood outside a gate, told she couldn't pass. She'd passed. Not because someone let her in, but because she refused to turn away. And she wasn't done yet. Because the next time she approached a guarded gate, it wouldn't be as a cadet or a captain. It would be as the one in charge, the one they were all waiting for, even if they didn't know it yet. The guards shifted uneasily at the checkpoint, the desert wind whipping dust around their boots. The sun blazed like a relentless overseer, making tempers short and patience thinner. The woman standing before them didn't look like anyone important, no medals, no uniform, no entourage. Just a calm, composed figure in plain clothes, holding a brown leather folder that had seen better days. Ma'am, said Sergeant Harris, trying to sound polite but firm, we told you, you can't pass this gate without clearance. Clara Matthews didn't respond immediately. Her eyes studied the base beyond the barrier, the gray hangars, the marching cadets, the faint sound of drills echoing through the morning air. For years, she had dreamed of standing here, not as a visitor or an officer, but as a commander. And now, After decades of fighting battles seen and unseen, she was here. Still, she didn't reveal her rank. Not yet. The young corporal beside Harris frowned, squinting at the folder in her hand. "What's in that?" he asked skeptically. Clara's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Just paperwork," she said softly. He crossed his arms. "You can leave it with us. We'll have it checked." The sergeant added, "Ma'am, it's for your safety as well as ours." Clara tilted her head slightly. "Safety," she repeated, her tone carrying the faintest trace of amusement. "That's always been the word, hasn't it?" Neither man caught the weight of her words. She wasn't talking about gates or guards. She was remembering every locked door, every closed meeting, every time someone told her she needed to wait her turn, or worse, that she wasn't meant for command. Inside her chest, her heart pounded not from anger, but from anticipation. She had seen worse faces than theirs, men who looked her in the eye and said she'd fail. But this moment was poetic. "Ma'am," Harris said again, his voice more insistent now, "you need to step aside. There's a protocol." At that, Clara took a deep breath. Slowly, she unclasped the worn leather folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. Her fingers brushed over the embossed insignia silver eagle. When she handed it to the sergeant, his brows furrowed. He wasn't sure whether to open it or call his superior first. The corporal leaned over his shoulder, curiosity replacing defiance. "Go ahead," Clara said calmly. "It's addressed to the commanding officer." The sergeant tore the seal open, scanning the paper quickly. His expression changed confusion, then disbelief, then something close to alarm. The corporal frowned. "What's wrong, sir?" The sergeant's throat tightened. His voice came out hoarse. It says here Colonel Clara J. Matthews is to assume command of this base effective immediately." The corporal blinked. "Wait, what?" Clara gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. "I believe that's me." For a moment, no one moved. The world seemed to freeze around them. The noise of drills in the distance faded, replaced by the hum of realization. The corporal stammered, "Ma'am, you're the new commander?" "I am," she said simply. The sergeant's face flushed with embarrassment. His hand flew to his cap as he straightened sharply. "Ma'am, Commander, my apologies." "We had no idea." Clara raised a hand gently to stop him. "No apologies needed, Sergeant. You were doing your job." He looked at her, surprised by her composure. Most officers he'd met would have berated him for such a mistake. But there was something different about her, something steady, unshakable. "Thank you for standing firm," she continued. "A base runs on discipline, not assumptions. You upheld that." The corporal swallowed hard, trying to recover from his mortification. "Ma'am, if we'd known, but you didn't," Clara interrupted softly. "And that's the beauty of it." She stepped forward as the barrier lifted, her boots crunching against the gravel. Every step felt symbolic, as though she were crossing not just into a base, but into a moment she'd been preparing for all her life. Behind her, the guards exchanged stunned glances. The woman they had just stopped was now their commanding officer. The story would spread before noon. By evening, it would be all anyone talked about. As she entered the main compound, several soldiers saluted instinctively, not yet realizing who she was. Her reputation hadn't reached here yet, but it would. Inside the administrative building, an aide rushed forward, startled by her early arrival. "Ma'am, Colonel Matthews. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow's ceremony." "I prefer to arrive unannounced," she replied. "It's the only way to see how things really run." The aide hesitated. "And did you find what you were looking for?" Clara gave a faint smile. "Yes," she said. "Honest soldiers who follow orders, even when it's inconvenient. That's a good sign." Later that afternoon, word had spread through every corridor and barracks. Some soldiers chuckled awkwardly about the gate incident. Others whispered that it was a test she had planned on purpose. But none of that mattered to her. She stood in her new office, looking out the window at the sprawling base, the aircraft lined like silver birds, the cadets marching in perfect rhythm. This was her new world, and she intended to lead it not by intimidation, but by inspiration. The door opened. Sergeant Harris entered, hat in hand. "Permission to speak, Mom?" he said nervously. "Granted," she said, turning to face him. I wanted to apologize again. For earlier." Clara shook her head. "You don't owe me an apology, Sergeant. You owe me your best work. That's all I ask." He looked up, confused but grateful. "Yes, ma'am." As he turned to leave, she added quietly, "And Sergeant?" He paused. "Next time someone comes to that gate, remember, you never know who they might become." He nodded slowly, those words sinking deep. That evening, during the informal meeting with senior officers, Clara officially addressed the leadership team. They were composed, but curious. This was their first time under the command of a woman in the base's long history. "Gentlemen and ladies," she began, her voice steady, carrying across the room. "I'm not here to rewrite the rules. I'm here to remind us why we follow them." Eyes turned toward her. Some faces were respectful, others cautious. "I know some of you have questions," she continued. "Some of you may wonder if I can handle this role, if my presence changes how we operate." She let the silence settle before adding, "It doesn't. Discipline, respect, and excellence are genderless." A few heads nodded. The tension in the room began to ease. "I was stopped at your gate today," she said, allowing a small grin. "Twice, actually." A low ripple of laughter passed through the group. Those soldiers were right to do so, because leadership begins with accountability, not authority. It was in that moment the officers began to see her not as a headline or a symbol, but as one of their own. Later that night, Clara walked the base alone. The air was cool, the stars bright. The same guards from earlier stood at their post, now alert and visibly nervous as she approached. "Evening, gentlemen," she greeted. They straightened instantly. "Good evening, ma'am." She paused beside them, watching the horizon. "You did well today," she said. "Never doubt that." The corporal asked hesitantly, "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, why didn't you just tell us who you were?" Clara looked up at the sky, her eyes thoughtful. "Because sometimes people's true character only shows when they think no one's watching." They nodded quietly, understanding. As she walked away, the sergeant whispered, "She's something else, isn't she?" The corporal nodded. "Yeah. And to think we told her she couldn't pass." The guardhouse fell silent after that, but in their hearts, a lesson lingered, a lesson about humility, respect, and the quiet strength that walks softly but carries command. That night, as lights dimmed across the base, Clara Matthews finally allowed herself a rare smile. She had crossed many gates in her life, gates of doubt, fear, and prejudice. But this one, she thought, had been worth every step. The morning sun painted Camp Garrison in gold, the warmth contrasting with the crisp, disciplined movements of soldiers marching across the parade grounds. The base was alive not only with drills and machinery, but with purpose. It was a living testament to what leadership could achieve when discipline met vision, courage, and empathy. Colonel Clara J. Matthews walked through the grounds, her boots clicking rhythmically on the pavement. Soldiers snapped to attention instinctively, but this time she didn't flinch. She returned their salute with a measured nod. Leadership, she had learned, was not about fear. It was about trust earned over years of trial and triumph. The base had changed since she first assumed command. Morale was higher, operations more precise, and every soldier knew recruits, seasoned veterans, even officers who had once doubted her knew that their leader had walked the same battlefield. They feared, carried the same burdens, and had risen from failure and pain with unwavering resolve. Clara made her way to the headquarters office, glancing at the walls lined with maps, operational schedules, and commendations. Each paper, each note, told a story of logistics solved, convoys protected, and missions accomplished. But beyond those, there were personal touches, photographs of soldiers at work, community outreach programs, and even drawings from the children of local villages. Leadership, she had discovered, wasn't just about strategy. It was about heart. Her phone buzzed. It was a video call from her parents back in Willow Creek. "Colonel Matthews?" Her father asked, pride evident in his voice. "Yes, sir," she said, smiling. "Your mother and I watched the ceremony yesterday," he continued. "We never imagined the girl we once worried about would be commanding a base like this." Clara's mother added softly, "We always knew you'd get here. You just proved it to everyone else." She chuckled quietly, feeling the weight of their words. Years of doubt, struggle, and determination had led her to this moment. The girl who had once been told, "You can't pass," now shaping the lives of hundreds of soldiers. Her attention returned to the base. Today, she had an inspection scheduled, a routine yet symbolic event. Every unit would demonstrate their readiness, from tactical drills to supply accountability. She walked with purpose, observing cadets moving in perfect formation, equipment checked meticulously, and officers reporting statuses clearly. At the far end of the drill field, Sergeant Harris approached, straightening his cap. "Colonel Matthews, the platoons are assembled. They're awaiting your review." Clara nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant. Let's make this quick and thorough." As she inspected each unit, she noticed subtle differences. Soldiers walked with more confidence, officers coordinated with more clarity, and even the newest recruits carried themselves with the assurance of those who knew they had a leader who believed in them. After the final review, she called her officers together. The sun was high, casting long shadows over the parade grounds. "Today isn't about what you can do for me," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It's about what we can do together. This base, our missions, and the lives we protect rely on discipline, loyalty, and courage. But above all, they rely on each of you carrying forward the trust we've built." Her gaze swept the group, pausing briefly on officers who had once doubted her. "I was once told I couldn't pass. At a gate by a few soldiers who didn't know me. And yet, here we are. Leadership isn't given. It's earned through every choice, every action, and every step forward even when the world doubts you." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. One young lieutenant raised a hand hesitantly. "Colonel Matthews, how do you keep going when the weight of command gets so heavy?" Clara smiled faintly. "By remembering that it's never about me. Every decision I make, every risk I take, is for the people under my command and for those who rely on us. When you focus on their lives and their trust, the weight becomes purpose. And purpose makes the impossible bearable." Applause broke out, not obligatory, but genuine. Soldiers who had once doubted her now recognized the depth of her strength. Later that evening, as she walked the base alone, Clara reflected on her journey. She thought of the first time she had been stopped by guards, of the grueling days at West Point, the injuries in the desert, the ambush in the village, and the countless nights spent wondering if she was capable of command. Each challenge, each setback, had been a step toward this moment. At the gate she had once been stopped at, a group of new recruits was practicing their inspection protocols. They glanced nervously as she approached, instinctively straightening. She stopped, watching them. The memory of her own encounter at that gate decades ago rose vividly. The doubt in the guard's eyes, the words, "You can't pass." She smiled quietly to herself. Leadership, she realized, was about creating opportunities for others to grow. That moment had been a lesson for her. Now it was time to let it teach others. "Remember," she said aloud, addressing the recruits, though they weren't expecting her voice, "protocols exist for a reason. But courage and integrity, those are what make you pass through any gate." The recruits nodded, some wide-eyed, absorbing the presence of someone who had lived the lesson they were only beginning to learn. Walking back to her office, Clara knew that her journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new soldiers to lead, and new gates to cross. But she also knew this. No barrier, no doubt, no voice of disbelief could ever define her. Only her actions, her choices, and her perseverance could. The final piece of her legacy wasn't the rank, the medals, or even the victories in the field. It was the inspiration she gave to every soldier, male or female, young or old, who had ever been told they couldn't. Because Clara Matthews had once been stopped, and now she commanded. And as she looked out over Camp Garrison that night, the desert sky glowing with stars, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled. Not a mission of war, but a mission of life, courage, and unbreakable resolve. She had passed every gate, and the soldiers who served under her knew, without question, that they followed someone who had earned every step, every challenge, and every victory. From the small town of Willow Creek to the command tower of Camp Garrison, Clara Matthews' story would be remembered, a story not of privilege or circumstance, but of grit, heart, and the relentless pursuit of what was right. Her name, once unknown, was now synonymous with leadership, resilience, and the power to rise above every doubt. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of her office, the old leather folder from the day she first approached the base gate sat as a reminder that sometimes the simplest moments carry the greatest lessons.